alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm your host Tim Niederreiter, who's just a little bit too saliva induced today. But hey, it's a special. You probably couldn't even hear what I did, but never mind. I had a little trouble. But with me today is a wonderful guest, Fern Brady. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be with you today, Tim.
Well, it's great to have you. I mean, honestly, you've got quite a list of writing-related stuff that you do. So tell the listeners a little bit about that and about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Fern Brady, and I am the founder and the owner of Inklings Publishing, which is a small press in Houston, Texas. We were recently listed as like the number 5 biggest or best publisher in Houston. And we made the list of the top 20 in Texas, so that was pretty exciting. We've been in business this is going to be year number 9. We are starting year number 9 in 2022. So that's one of my areas. I am also a writer myself, so I have a science, fantasy, romance, space opera epic that I am working on. A little bit of Star Wars meets Game of Thrones meets Lord of the Rings and all kinds of stuff in between. and then on top of that, I also do some developmental editing. I work with a couple of authors as a writing coach, guiding them through their, creating their work, the drafting process and everything, and then also just making decisions as far as how do they want to proceed to bring it out into the public space? Do they want to self-publish? Do they want to go traditional? Kind of guiding them through some of those areas. So those are the 3 kind of big realms that I do as a writer in the industry.
Well, awesome. There's a lot there, and there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, it sounds like the sort of books, between the stuff you edit and the stuff you write, I don't think we're going to be bored. Let me just put it that way.
Yes, and it's very interesting because, of course, I edit and work with science fiction, fantasy authors and romance authors as well. But I also work with 2 memoirists, 2 memoir writers who are working on some very deep and very personal, stories that they have to share. And so it's an interesting way to toggle back and forth from, real life memoir, memory writing to like the completely crazy sci-fi world of the other authors.
Oh yeah, getting down to earth in a real world stories from people's lives, right? Compared to, well, what I generally write as well, which is the far flung stuff, the weird fantasy, the stuff that just kind of it sets on a good day it gets me out of bed. Let me put it that way. It gets me to get to work. On a bad day, it helps a little bit, but hey, whatever. Yeah. Too many bad days lately. Anyway,
one of the things I have found is that, even though we might work in fiction, we are still dealing with a lot of our own personal things in our work.
Yeah.
We just do it through fiction. And in many ways, the power of our genre of science, fantasy, and sci-fi and stuff is that we can talk about issues that are very real in our world. And we can talk about them in a way that's not confrontational because it's a made-up world.
Yeah, that's very important. Yeah.
Yeah. So people can explore, how they feel about things in a non-confrontational way. We can express our worldviews through our fiction.
Yeah, and it's a safe way to explore all sorts of dangerous topics as well, and not just physical danger, but all sorts of other things that can go on in fiction. That is less pleasant to experience in real life, to test out, to see I'll give that the old try, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example, but whatever. I think people have imaginations, they'll figure it out. They have an idea what I'm talking about here. So Fern, you've got this, you were talking about your series, though, your current work in progress, right? This big sci-fi epic fantasy. it sounds like you've kind of thrown the kitchen sink in that one, and I'm just curious: is that difficult? Is that a difficult one to work with, or is it easier to work with a story where there's like almost no limits? Is what it sounds like. You're going all over the place.
Well, one of the things that I've discovered is that since it's science fantasy, right? Because my series takes place in Thyraine's galactic wall, so it's our galactic neighborhood. Earth is part of it, even though we don't know. And there's a very specific reason in the book why Earth is left alone. But there's science in it. There's space travel. There's all kinds of scientific things, but there's also fantasy. And one of the things that I discovered very early on is that sci-fi trumps fantasy.
Oh, really?
So because once the reader has a sense that it's a sci-fi piece, you really have to massage the fantasy into it. There has to be a very, deep sense of plausibility, even with the fantasy elements, right? Now, you can still do it, right? You can still throw in there the magic and, some of the creatures, because like in my universe, I have dragonborn, right? Half humans, half dragons. I've got shifters that are dragons. I have elves, I have dwarves. I have all kinds of fantasy creatures. But, I had to massage it in a way that it could make sense, within the scope of a sci-fi kind of world. Because, that's sort of one of the things when people pick up a book and they start with a science fiction element, they sort of expect for it to be all sci-fi. And so if you're not careful how you meld in the fantasy, it can jar the reader right out of it. And so you don't want that to happen.
Right. I was kind of thinking, I guess my question there is, do you think it could go the other way? Or because if you start with a fantasy setting and then say there's also space travel inside of a fantasy universe, that could be more the other way, right? Potentially. And do you think it could work that way? Or it does. It definitely makes more sense if you're going to set it in a universe that has Earth in it, that it goes the way you just described as far as genre.
I think that for most readers, the moment there is science in it, it sort of takes hold stronger than the fantasy. But you can do it though, because there's a lot of really great, fantasy pieces out there that, like for example, Dune, right? In Dune, you have very heavy sci-fi pieces. There's technology, there's this empire and stuff, but you also have the Ben Gesserit, right?
Yeah.
I probably am mispronouncing, but the ladies, right? And they can control when they get pregnant. They can control the gender of their baby. They can project the voice, and there's all this fantasy stuff, and none of it is explained scientifically, right?
Right, and there's and there's even future, the ability to see the future and stuff like that, and then shape-shifting in later books and stuff like that. So they have most fantasy tropes you could think of are in Dune in some way or another. They even have giant monsters. They've got the sandworms, so not quite a dragon, but close. Kind of similar in their role in the story. So that's a really good example. That's all I was going to say. After that, but I do think it's possible. Because when I write a lot of stuff that kind of blends genres, and at least the reviews are always like, well, this is science, this is fantasy. Basically, they always think it's fantasy, even the ones where I set it on Earth, and it's clearly a future of our world. It's like maybe it's just my ideas too weird, so people don't think they're not plausible to people. A lot of them still like the books, but it's like, this doesn't make sense. Or like how scientifically would that work? And if no one can see it, they assume it's fantasy, and that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and honestly, fantasy is a lot more fun to play with because there's no limitations to what you can do with fantasy. Literally, the sky's the limit on what you can play with. And you see that it's interesting as far as like the reactions of people to different pieces of that, because you saw the Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
And the first three, the idea came out, and there was no worry about like why. Why
Yes.
was he able to use the Force, and Darth Vader could use the Force, and there was no conversation about it. But once the fandoms developed, right,
Yeah. And the
and
extended
then we
universe
went
stuff. Yeah.
into the prequels, which are contentious, but the prequels brought in this idea of the midichlorians,
Yeah.
right? And really what they were trying to do is to give the Jedi plausibility,
Right.
to take away the fantasy-ness of it. Because, I mean, basically they were space wizards, right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes. Well, space monks almost too. Space Buddhist monks.
Yeah.
But supernatural powers. Yeah.
Yeah, and personally, like, I have no problem with them just being, space monk wizards, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm perfectly okay with that. I did not need an explanation. I was totally okay. I suspended disbelief. I was happy,
Yeah.
But you see the pressure that was applied, and the reason for the whole midichlorian thing, that came from the Star Trek side, right? Because Star Trek fans who also like Star Wars, were like, okay, they were more hard sci-fi. They wanted more of an explanation for everything, I'm good with
I mean, yeah, me too. I don't need the midichlorians. I actually think they detract from the story because, I mean, in a way, because it's a retcon, basically. Even though, it's like, okay, no, there was always a scientific reason, or there was always this particular microorganism that makes the Force happen, which is wild and silly. Because how does a microorganism give you telekinesis, right? I don't understand that. That's never explored. Or the ability to see the future,
Mm-hmm.
And none of that. They don't explain why any of the powers manifest, just that only some people have them, basically. That's all they go. That's as far as it goes.
Yeah. And so, like, for my book, like I said, I draw from Dune. I draw from Star Wars. I love to mishmash the science and the fantasy. And in my world, we have the Rajin. And the Rajin are a religious order. They are a religious order. They follow the great I am. That's what they call God. And basically, they train in using their minds to meditate and to be able to draw on the power of the universe, right? Because the universe is energy, right? Everything is essentially energy.
Yeah.
And so the Rajin are able to access the energy that is in the universe to do all kinds of things, right? To like reshape things into like create a door, where there is no door and be able to enter, or, to do all manner of things that they are able to by modifying the energy patterns of different things on, of matter, basically. And I really don't give a scientific explanation at all.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they're a religious order. It's mystical. And so we don't need an explanation. That's just what they are. Kind of like the Ben Gesserit of Dune, right? Nobody gives an explanation as to why they do what they do. So I kind of went that direction with my space wizards, because I think every good story of this kind needs some space wizards of some kind.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear you say that. I have a bunch of ideas that involve space wizards. One of them I've worked on fairly extensively, and I actually called it Space Wizards was my working title. But in that, all the wizards were aliens. They were all alien, and each alien species had their own kind of magic, basically. And those were partially biological in nature, so that and the humans that had come from another universe in this setting, like they broke through into this alien universe where each species, this far-flung alien species, then starts losing their magic for various reasons because humanity has arrived and broken the wall that protected their magic, more or less, and so the magic's leaking out of their universe. And I really like that one, but it is a very, very kind of steep story to write because so many of the characters in it are kind of weird aliens.
Yeah, but I mean, how fun and how wonderful to have a cast of diverse beings that are literally totally different from ours, because you usually see, you do see some alien species within certain ones, but I mean, the humans always dominate. So it's kind of
Yeah.
cool, the idea of having a storyline where literally all of them are just aliens.
Yeah.
And so please tell me you have some kind of lizard like aliens in your world, because I just feel like we don't have enough lizard aliens.
I put reptilians in my straight up high fantasy, but there were reptiles that in the first of in Demon Scroll, my first epic fantasy book, dark epic fantasy, I guess they're calling that genre now. I'm so behind on all this genre stuff. When even though I published that book 2019, I'm like, okay, this is. I didn't know what to make. I mean, and it was more normal fantasy. I knew that much, but I didn't know what else to do with it. But generally, I mean, and actually, the thing about the setting is like the other one, the Phoenix Foundation or whatever I end up calling that series when it eventually releases, was that they were is that the main alien species I concerned myself with the main character is one of these guys. Was they were born as shapeshifters. They're chiseled out of stone. And then they become shapeshifters in their youth, and then eventually they take a form. So they have all sorts of different forms that they can be, and that could be reptilian. I'm just a thought there. I'm not thinking they could, because they could be mammals or reptiles or anything in between, really.
This is such a cool idea that like you could, as you mature, you can pick your form.
Yeah, they choose what form their body takes. Yeah, as they mature.
I love that idea. I mean, what a cool concept, And I wonder, in many ways, for example, like for people who have gender identity,
yeah, kind of unusual gender, more or less standard, non-cis people, you might say.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool idea. Like, okay, you can pick. Maybe you begin to feel or sense what you're supposed to be.
Right. You discover what you really want, what you need to be, or what you were all along in some cases. Yeah, depending on. Yeah. Exactly. That. Yeah. And obviously that kind of physiology is very weird, and I enjoy that kind of thing with fantasy species and races and stuff. But I've always really liked making that stuff up. Like making up, because I like my elves and my dwarves too, but I really needed to put a spin on everything, and I can't just have like especially when I go sci-fi. I don't really want to, because there aren't as many like quote unquote standard sci-fi races, which is why I think it's sometimes considered more difficult to create aliens than to create, say, fantasy races.
Yeah.
But really, it's the same thing, isn't it? I mean, I think it is.
Yeah. And to an extent, that's kind of where I went with mine, because. In my world, we have elves.
Yeah.
And so that's traditionally more a fantasy, quote unquote, fantasy trope. But who's to say that there aren't some kind of race of beings out there that are elves, right? What we would traditionally consider an elf. And they're just an alien being on an alien planet. And they're, and that's just where those kinds of beings developed,
Right.
I think in a way, I think for Star Trek, Spock.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, Vulcans are very much elves in a lot of ways.
Very much so. I mean, they didn't call them that, but no. I mean, basically, the whole genesis of that idea was there. So right. They were drawing on the whole fantasy element there.
Yeah, there's a couple of like, I'm a big Warhammer 40,000 fan, Warhammer in general, but like that in those games they have. I mean, it's a very similar to the Vulcan-ish deal, where they have the Eldar, which are space elves, literally that's star elves from Tolkien, and they just aped that, and they have these space elves in the game, in the books. They're all over the place. I mean, and just like the Vulcans, they have dark space elves, because the Vulcans, you got Romulans, and for the Eldar you have the Dark Eldar or the Drakari, whatever you call them nowadays. They got all these names. They're trying to put their serial numbers on them in the company that makes those games. But they're dark elves in space. I mean, it's that easy. Yeah, and it's this cool. I think it's actually kind of cool. I've got nothing against that kind of thing, and I've been tempted to do some of that stuff myself. But when I feel like And actually, I feel like I'm kind of getting less creative as I get older. You know, in some ways, like I'm less interested in creating new weird species with their own life cycles and stuff. You know, I still like what I made. I just have less patience to create more of it. You know.
Yeah, and I mean, talk about life cycles, right?
Yeah.
Once you start playing with universe, right, and then you're creating these planets, you know, so in by the end of book 1 of my series, which is the book that's out, you know, because I'm still working on book 2, but Verena is pregnant, right? She's pregnant, and so one of the biggest issues that I have been working on as I go through book 2 is, okay, how long is a pregnancy on planet Jorn, right? Because, you know, really, I could make it whatever I want, right? I mean, technically speaking, it's another planet, and yes, they're kind of human-like, right? But
not quite human. They're humanoid, yeah.
They're humanoids. The DNA might be similar, but I mean, I could technically do whatever I wanted with it. And one of the things that I really, really wanted her to give birth in a very specific moment of the war. And so I had to start calculating, okay, well, how many months is that? You know? So it turns out it's a lot more than 9. And so one of the things that I realized is, well, I actually built in, you know, a 15-month year cycle into Jorn in book 1 because, you know, they have the regular, you know, spring, right?
Yeah.
Summer, fall, and the winter. But right after winter, they have an extra season, which is an extra 3 months, which we called Wagur, right?
Okay.
And Wagur is a time when the planet has gotten a little bit too close to the sun and the rotation and their orbit. And so all of the winter snows melt very, very rapidly, too rapidly to be absorbed. And the atmosphere starts releasing moisture. And so you have like a monsoon type situation where it's raining all the time and the planet snows are melting. So you have
massive
this really
flood. Yeah.
horrible 3 months, which they call Wagur, which nobody can do much of anything. So like the force shields are on all the villages, all the farmsteads, and, you know, everybody's sort of stuck indoors. There's festivals that they have and stuff. And so, I mean, it makes for a great time to have a war because, you know, now you got to think about like moving, you know, tanks and troops and things through like mushy, you know, flooded realms. And then like what happens when the force shields go down on a city, you know, and then all those poor people, you know, they're getting flooded on top of being, you know, shelled or whatever from the war. So I have had a great time.
Your characters, not so much. The poor people.
I mean, you know, but come on, we're authors. You're
exactly. Yeah.
People, you know.
No, it's true. I do enjoy it when my characters are in trouble and they're in pain.
I mean, that's kind of our job, right?
Yeah, and if there can be torrential rain, and flooding and war, well, I mean, who could resist it as an author?
I mean,
you know.
And on top of that, she's pregnant. You know,
yeah.
So she's the queen, and she's in the middle of all this mess. But that is like, you know, one of the things I was thinking. Okay, so I did give us an extra 3 months. So I started thinking, okay, well, what percentage of the year is a human pregnancy? You know, like 9 months out of the 12. And I sort of decided that same percentage would be the case on Jorn, right? For her, it'd be a little longer because the year is longer. And then, of course, I had to have a conversation with the doctor, her gynecologist, right? On like, wait, you know, how come on other planets it's shorter? And so the gynecologist is explaining, you know, that it's because of the year and the body, you know, getting the rhythm of the year. And so then, of course, Verena has to ask the question, well, what if I move to another planet, you know, can I speed this up? And the doctor's like, no, because
you're already set. Yeah.
From here. here, you know? And so then she has to like talk about like generations, right? How many generations would it take if like, say you came from Jorn, and so you're used to a 15-month cycle, but then you move to Earth, which only has a 12-month cycle. How many generations would it take for your biology to adapt to the home planet, the new planet, you know? So yeah, I went totally down a rabbit hole.
Yes. Sounds like it.
Yes, it was crazy.
But hey, I mean, I'm no stranger to those rabbit holes, especially when it comes to weird geography, actually. I mean, I've got this whole, my most science fiction series is, well, I've only got one book in it so far, but it's called Origin of Storms is the first book. It's called, but it is about it's set in a pillar universe, which is a universe that doesn't have planets or stars, and my audience can take a drink because I mentioned it again. But it's one of my favorite settings I've ever made up. It's a universe where instead of having outer space, there's no outer space. It's just all kind of weird oxygenated mist instead, and that fills up basically the entire universe for various reasons. Except where it gets super cold, obviously. But anyway, long story short, there are these enormous pillars that kind of fulfill the roles of planets. But they're infinitely tall because they go from the top of the universe to the bottom, and there's no end to the universe. So they have an infinite height, but they're finitely wide, right? They're big cylinders. So it's pretty crazy how they it's basically you have this giant forest of enormous pillars and full of mist and stuff, and then because there's air everywhere, there can be storms the size of Jupiter sweeping through these pillars and messing with everyone.
Nice.
And that's what that book's kind of about, yeah. At least
that's the fun part of our work. I mean, okay, so like I had this one time when I was dating this gentleman, and he told me all about his day, right? He was an accountant, and he was talking about blah blah numbers and all this jazz, and he asked me what I had been doing, and I told him, I was outlining my universe, like I was creating my different galaxies and itemizing where the different planets are so that I can be more consistent in my story for the space travel. And he's like, so wait a minute, you spent the whole day drawing for you?
Oh, you were a writer.
I was like, it's not my fault you chose the wrong profession, okay? I'm just saying. Our profession is fun. Okay, it's fun.
It definitely is. That's best. I'd agree with that. I mean, I actually, that's a really good point because, and I shouldn't say at its best because it's basically, if you're doing it right, this should be fun. If you're doing it the right way for you as a writer, you shouldn't be miserable when you look at the page. That's just how I feel. I mean, I don't know. Or maybe when you look at the page, but there should always be something fun you can find in your work, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is work. Right. Yes. I mean, because there is all the fun creativity of it. But once you do have your rough draft and you've got it down, the revision pieces where you have to polish it, ensure there's consistency, and all of that, it can be harder.
Yeah,
I guess. A little bit less fun sometimes because now you're getting into the nitty gritty of making sure that you have active voice and making sure that all of the mechanics and stuff are proper. Mm-hmm. But, I think when you're passionate about what you do and you really love what you do, even the harder parts, the more like quote unquote boring parts of our job become good because it's part of the passion, right? It's part of pursuing a dream. Because I mean, I know once you publish and you're trying to sell them, oh my Lord, that's a rough go, right? Marketing and all of the promotions and how do you go about it, and that can be really, really hard. But again, once you get out there and you start engaging with readers and you're talking about your passion, you go back to the love, right? The love that underpins being a creative.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a lot of fun talking about the writing process and stuff, but I wanted to try to slip in, people, this is a blast from the past, a little bit of a reading segment this week. What have you been reading lately, Fern?
All right. So I started a whole series called The Rage Wars, which was written by Tim LeBon. and it's the Predator, right?
Like from the Arnold
movie,
Schwarzenegger movie and beyond. Yeah.
Arnie Schwarzenegger movies, right? Predator. I love Predator. Okay, I love Predator. I love the whole culture of him. I love just the technology. I mean, I'm in love with Predator, even though they're really weird looking.
And they're kind of they are kind of ugly, as one might say,
they really
in a certain movie about the same name. Yeah,
so it's kind of weird. But this series, The Rage War, it starts with the book Incursion, and I had just finished it. Now, when I bought it, there's 3 books in this series, and they only had book 1 and book 3. So I went ahead and bought book 3 too, because, I figured if I get it hooked into this, I'm going to need book 3. But then I finished book 1, which is the Incursion book. And so then I had to hunt for book 2 because, I cannot read things out of order. I'm just not, I cannot do it. And so I finally found it, and it just came in actually a couple weeks ago. So I am excited to get started on book 2 of this, Incursion, Rage War trilogy of Predator. It's very interesting to read Predator versus watch it, because I don't know about you, but I was introduced to it through the movies. Right?
Yeah, me too. I mean, the movie's the original work, right? The first Predator movie, I think, is the original.
And then kind of the comics, which are still very visual, but like a chapter book on it is very cool to think. Like, I was amazed how my mind filled in so many pieces just using what I knew from the movie.
Right. Yeah.
And filled it in, and I really recommend it. The writing is great. I mean, you get sucked into the story. It's wonderful.
Well, awesome. That sounds like a good time. Especially, I assume this is from the Predator's point of view, or is it more like it's about predators, not about people fighting predators?
No, this is the predators, and they it's all from the predator's point of view, and it's interesting because there's even like some female predators.
Oh yeah,
as protagonists, and that is really cool to like. Kind of have that input, because we're so used to all of the movie predators have been guys, basically.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and so it's very cool to have a female predator perspective in this book. I'm intrigued. I'm really intrigued to see what he does with it.
Awesome. Well, so I also have been reading something I actually just wrapped up reading Zen and the Art of Writing, the book of essays by Ray Bradbury. It's high quality. I've got a few poems left to read at the end. I think I finished all the essays. I got to the title essay, which is interesting because this is the last essay in the book, I'm pretty sure. And usually when I read nonfiction books, where collections of essays, that they put the title essay first. It is interesting that they say that he saved this one for last, and it was well worth the wait, because it's a powerful, that essay in particular is quite fascinating. Though I thought it was funny how he mentions in the essay that he didn't know a whole lot about Zen until like 2 weeks before he wrote the essay. And so it's mostly referring to Zen archery, because there's a book about Zen archery that he took the title from and changed it to writing. And anyway, it's very interesting. And Ray Bradbury is a very poetic voice, very powerful prose in general. I really like this, and I think a lot of people can get a lot of use out of it too, as far as, like you were saying before, the joy of writing. Learn to love what you do, and because you might think that just making stuff up is difficult work, and kind of sometimes it is. But if you're not having fun with it, what's the point? It's always my point of view, but Ray Bradbury comes from a similar place, I think. So anyway, I really enjoyed that book. So that's where I'm at right now.
You know what? I did not realize he had a nonfiction book on writing. So I'm going to have to look that up, because that sounds very, very interesting.
Yeah, check it out. It's very good. I mean, I've not read a ton of his fiction, but I'm going to have to now, because his voice is amazing. Yeah, just in the nonfiction, I was like, wow, this is really fun. Anyway, so Fern Brady, it's been a lot of fun having you on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on. I enjoy talking all things writing, and it's been very fun just having a conversation on fantasy and sci-fi.
Well, yeah, it's been great having you. Tell people where they can find your books and what they should look for. Oh, and your publishing company, just in general, pimpage.
Okay, yeah. So you can get our books on the publisher's website, Inklings, like from the Inklings Society, right? Inklings.publishing.com is our website, so you can get them there, and you can get them on Amazon. You can just look up Fern Brady. There are two Fern Bradys, by the way. One is a Canadian comedian, not me, and then the other one is me. And so when you look us up, just make sure it's not the Canadian comedian. Although, interestingly, we kind of look similar. So it's kind of weird.
Oh, separated at birth?
It's very interesting. It's very interesting. But, and then my first novel is out, and it's called United Vidden, with a Vidden. And United Vidden is the first book in the series, and book 2 is coming in December. And I have a little novella that I'm going to be putting out in November that is kind of following a minor character from the book that's going to be, a very crucial player kind of coming up as we go into book 3. But, you can't give him too much space in the main line. So he had to have his own book separate.
Well, great. That sounds like a lot of fun. And as for this podcast and me, you can find my books on mental. You can find my books on timniederwriter.com/books, and you can find that'll give you the links to everywhere you want to read them. Generally, the ebooks are only available on Amazon because I'm exclusive right now, but that could change. I'm looking into things, and also you can find the print books the print on demand books just about anywhere. You can find print on demand books. Then finally, you can find this podcast at mentalcellarpublications.com. Give us a like or a review. I've seen some big spikes in listenership, so if you're new to the podcast, welcome, and it's great to have you. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye now. Oh, well, it happened again. Never mind. I turned my mouse back. My mouse goes to sleep because it's wireless. Anyway, we're done, folks. Good night.
That tears it.